My father looked straight through my son like he was invisible. 5 years old, standing in the doorway of the house where I grew up, holding a drawing he'd made in kindergarten. A family tree with crayons. Our entire family gathered for Thanksgiving dinner, and my father refused to acknowledge that Noah existed. Not a hello, not a glance, nothing. Just turned his back and walked into the dining room like my child was a ghost. Noah's hand went limp in mine. The drawing fluttered to the floor. I watched my son's face crumble in real time, confusion bleeding into hurt, and I knew in that moment that something inside me shattered beyond repair. My father thought he was teaching me a lesson about morality and family values. He didn't realize he was creating his own destruction. My name is Hannah Whitmore, and this is the story of how my father erased my child for 5 years, and how I made sure the entire family watched when the truth destroyed him. It started the day Noah was born. I was 24, unmarried, and alone in that hospital room except for my mother, who wept over her grandson like he was the most precious thing she'd ever seen. She held him against her chest and whispered promises about the life he'd have, the family who would love him. I believed her. I was young enough and desperate enough to believe that blood would matter more than pride. My father arrived 3 hours later, walked into the room in his press suit, still wearing his work badge from the law firm where he'd been a partner for 30 years. He glanced at me in the hospital bed. He glanced at my mother holding Noah. Then he crossed his arms and delivered the words that would define the next 5 years of our lives. Children born out of wedlock have no place in this family. You made your choice, Hannah. Now live with it. He turned and left. Didn't hold his grandson. Didn't ask his name. Just left my mother sobbing and me staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had just happened. My mother tried. God! She tried so hard to build bridges between us. She'd bring Noah to Sunday dinners when my father was supposedly working late. She'd sneak photos of him into family albums when he wasn't looking. She'd whisper to me on the phone about how eventually he'd come around, how he just needed time to process, how deep down he loved us both. I wanted to believe her. I spent 2 years believing her, showing up to family events with Noah dressed in his best clothes, hoping this would be the day my father would see past his rigid rules and recognize his own grandson. It never happened. Christmas morning, Noah was 6 months old. My brother's twins got a mountain of presents from our father. Noah got nothing. Not a card. Not a single acknowledgement that he existed. Easter, Thanksgiving, birthdays. My siblings' children got envelopes with checks. My son got erased. And every single time, my father would look right past him like he was furniture. Invisible. Worthless. Not worth the effort of even pretending to care. The worst part wasn't the rejection itself. It was watching Noah slowly realize he was different. At 2 years old, he didn't understand why Grandpa hugged his cousins, but not him. At 3, he started asking why he didn't get presents like the other kids. By 4, he stopped trying to say hello. He'd stand behind my legs during family gatherings, silent and small, while my father held court at the head of the table, talking about legacy and values and what it meant to be a Whitmore, how important it was to maintain standards, how children needed proper foundations. All of it aimed at me like bullets I was supposed to absorb quietly. My siblings would shift uncomfortably in their seats, but say nothing. My mother would stare at her plate and pretend she didn't hear. And I would sit there, rage building in my chest like a pressure cooker, knowing that if I exploded, if I said what I really thought, I'd be proving him right. That I was unstable, emotional, unfit. So I stayed silent. I smiled. I played the role he'd assigned me. Noah's father died before he was born. Jackson was 26, a carpenter with plans to propose the week he found out I was pregnant. He never got the chance. Construction accident. Wrong place, wrong time. A cable snapped and took him instantly. My father never acknowledged that either. Never said he was sorry for my loss. Never admitted that Jackson's death meant Noah would grow up without a father. In his mind, Jackson was just another mistake I'd made. Another poor choice that resulted in consequences I deserved to suffer. I had the engagement ring Jackson bought. Simple silver band with a small diamond he'd saved for 3 months to afford. He'd shown it to his best friend, told him he was going to ask me that weekend. The ring sat in my jewelry box for 5 years, a reminder of the life we were supposed to have, the family we were supposed to be. My father never asked about it, never asked about Jackson's family, who lived 3 states away and couldn't afford to visit often. Never cared that Noah had lost a father before he ever had one. When Noah turned 5, he asked me a question that nearly broke me. We were sitting in our small apartment, the one I could barely afford on my administrative assistant salary. He was coloring at the kitchen table, and I was making dinner. Mac and cheese from a box because it was 3 days until payday. He put down his crayon and looked up at me with those big brown eyes that were exactly like Jackson's. "Mommy, does Grandpa hate me because I'm bad?" I had to grip the counter to stay standing. 5 years old. 5 years of absorbing rejection and cruelty, and he'd internalized it as his own fault. That he was bad. That he deserved to be invisible. I knelt down beside him and pulled him into my arms so tight he squeaked. Told him he was perfect. Told him he was loved. Told him that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and hurt people they should protect. But I couldn't tell him the truth. That his grandfather was cruel. That our family was broken. That none of this was fair. My mother called me one night after Noah was asleep. Her voice was shaking. That particular tremor that meant she'd been crying for hours. "Hannah, I need to tell you something. Something your father said." I waited, phone pressed against my ear, already knowing it would be bad. "He thinks Noah isn't actually your biological son. He thinks you cheated on Jackson, or that you're lying about who the father is, or that you used someone else to get pregnant after Jackson died. He's convinced himself that's why he can't accept him." The words didn't make sense at first. I actually laughed, this bitter, shocked sound that echoed in my quiet apartment. "He thinks I'm lying about being Noah's mother. He won't admit it directly, but yes, he's implied it several times. That you won't provide proof because you can't. That you're trying to pass off someone else's child as part of our family." I hung up. I actually hung up on my mother because if I kept talking, I would have said things I couldn't take back. Proof. He wanted proof that I had given birth to my own child. That's when I started planning. Not revenge exactly. More like insurance. Documentation. The kind of evidence that couldn't be argued with or dismissed or reinterpreted through my father's twisted lens of morality. I made an appointment with a DNA testing facility. Brought Noah in on a Saturday morning. Told him we were going to see a special doctor who would help us with something important. He was so brave. Didn't cry when they swabbed his cheek. Just held my hand and asked if he did a good job afterward. The results took 3 weeks. I had them certified, notarized, and filed in a safety deposit box I opened specifically for this purpose. Probability of maternity, 99.99%. Scientific proof that Noah was my biological son, that I had carried him, given birth to him, that every cell in his body traced back to me. I didn't tell anyone, didn't show my mother or confront my father. I just kept that envelope locked away and waited. I knew eventually there would be a moment when the truth would matter, when proof would be required. 2 years passed. Noah started 1st grade. He made friends who didn't know about our family situation, who invited him to birthday parties where grandparents showed up and took photos and acted like normal people. I watched him experience what family should look like through other people's lives. Meanwhile, my father's health started declining. 72 years old, a lifetime of stress and rigid control catching up with him. Heart problems, high blood pressure, the kind of issues that make lawyers start thinking about estate planning. I heard through my mother that he'd been meeting with his attorney regularly, updating his will, making sure his legacy was protected and distributed according to his exact specifications. My siblings were getting nervous, whispering about what they might inherit, whether they'd measured up to his impossible standards, whether their children would be provided for. I didn't care about the money. I'd never cared about his money. But I cared about Noah's name, about whether my father would erase him from the family record entirely, whether even in death, he'd find a way to make my son invisible. The call came on a Tuesday morning. My father had died in his sleep. Peacefully, my mother said, though I wasn't sure someone that full of judgment and bitterness could really die peacefully. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday, the will reading for the following Monday. I took time off work, arranged childcare for Noah, because I wasn't about to bring him to any of it. He'd suffered enough. I wore black to the funeral and stood in the back of the church while person after person talked about my father's integrity, his commitment to family values, his unwavering principles. They made him sound like a saint, like some pillar of the community who devoted his life to doing what was right. I thought about Noah asking if he was bad. I thought about 5 years of birthday parties without gifts. I thought about that drawing on the floor, and I stayed silent, because the real reckoning wasn't at his funeral. It was coming Monday morning in his attorney's conference room when the will was read, when I'd finally see exactly how thoroughly he'd tried to erase us. The attorney's office was downtown. Tall building, expensive furniture, the kind of place that charged by the minute. My siblings were already there when I arrived. My brother Thomas with his perfect wife and perfect twins. My sister Victoria with her husband and their 3 children. All of them looking nervous and hopeful, dressed like they were attending something important, which I guess they were. The distribution of our father's estate. His final judgment on whether they'd lived up to his standards. I sat in the back row of chairs they'd set up. My mother took the seat beside me, reached for my hand. She was shaking. The attorney, a man named Howard Brennan, who'd worked with my father for 20 years, cleared his throat, adjusted his reading glasses, opened the file that would determine how my father's memory would be preserved. Thank you all for coming. As executor of Daniel Whitmore's estate, it's my duty to read his last will and testament. I'll ask that you hold questions until the end. He began reading. The house went to my mother. Expected. Various investments split between Thomas and Victoria. The lake cabin to Thomas. The art collection to Victoria. Then came the section about grandchildren. My hands clenched in my lap. To the grandchildren of Daniel Whitmore, the following trust funds shall be established. He listed them. Thomas's twins, Maxwell and Sophia, $500,000 each. Victoria's children, Oliver, Penelope, and Charlotte, $500,000 each. Specific amounts, specific names, funds that would be available when they turned 25, meant for education or starting businesses or buying homes. Meant to give them foundations my father believed they deserved because they'd been born into proper families. Born the right way. I waited for Noah's name, waited for some acknowledgement, some small gesture that would prove my father had softened before he died, that he'd recognized what he'd done was wrong, that he'd tried to make it right. Howard kept reading, moved on to charitable donations, the law school scholarship fund, the church building renovation, specific charities my father had supported for decades. Noah's name never came. Not once. Not anywhere in that entire document. My father had died as he lived, erasing my son from existence, pretending he didn't have a 6th grandchild who shared his blood and his name. The lawyer finished reading, looked up at all of us. Are there any questions? I stood. Every head in the room turned toward me. My mother's grip on my hand tightened, trying to pull me back down. I ignored her. I have a question. Howard looked uncomfortable. Yes, Hannah. My son wasn't mentioned in that will. Noah Whitmore. I need to know if that was a clerical error or an intentional omission. Silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Thomas and Victoria wouldn't look at me. My mother was crying quietly beside my empty chair. Howard cleared his throat. Your father was very specific about the beneficiaries he wished to include. I can assure you there were no clerical errors. So he intentionally excluded his sixth grandchild from inheriting anything. Your father made his wishes clear regarding which children he considered part of his direct lineage. That phrase, direct lineage, like Noah was some kind of imposter, some stranger trying to claim a piece of something he didn't deserve. My hands were shaking now, not from sadness, from pure, white-hot rage that I'd been holding back for 5 years. I see. And what happens if someone has proof that contradicts the terms of the will? Howard frowned. I'm not sure I understand your question. I reached into my purse. My fingers found the envelope I'd been carrying for 2 years, the one I'd kept in that safety deposit box, waiting for exactly this moment. The scientific proof that my father had been wrong about everything. My father claimed my son wasn't part of his direct lineage. He told family members that he believed Noah wasn't actually my biological child, that I was lying about his parentage. Gasps around the room. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Thomas looked like he'd been slapped. That's not true, my mother said firmly, standing up. Hannah, your father never said that to me. He did, Mom. You called me that night, remember? You told me he'd implied it, that he couldn't accept Noah because he didn't believe he was really mine. More silence, the kind that meant everyone was remembering conversations they'd dismissed, comments they'd ignored, implications they hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Howard looked deeply uncomfortable now. Hannah, I'm not sure what you're suggesting, but I'm suggesting that my father based his will on a false premise, that he excluded my son because he believed a lie, and I have proof. I held up the envelope. Certified DNA results, dated 3 years ago, proving beyond any scientific doubt that Noah Whitmore is my biological son, my child, your client's grandson. I walked forward and placed the envelope on Howard's desk. He stared at it like it was a snake. These results were certified by GeneTech Laboratories, one of the most respected DNA testing facilities in the country. They're notarized, they're sealed, and they prove that every assumption my father made about my son was completely, scientifically, legally wrong. Howard opened the envelope with shaking hands. I watched him read, watched his face change as he processed what he was seeing. The letterhead, the technical language, the conclusion that couldn't be argued with. This states that you are Noah's biological mother with 99.99% certainty. That's correct, which means my father excluded his legitimate grandson from his will based on a belief that was factually incorrect. A belief he never verified, never investigated, just assumed was true because it fit his narrative about my choices and my morals. I turned to face my siblings. Noah is your nephew. He's your children's cousin. He's our mother's grandson. And he was erased from our family for 5 years because our father decided rules mattered more than truth. Because he'd rather believe I was lying than admit he was wrong. Victoria was crying now. Thomas looked sick. My mother had her face in her hands. Howard cleared his throat. I need to consult with the estate attorney who helped draft this will. There may be grounds for contesting the distribution if a biological heir was excluded based on factual errors. There are grounds, I said firmly. My father's will explicitly states it's meant for his direct lineage, his grandchildren. Well, I just proved Noah is his grandchild. His DNA is as much Whitmore as any child in this room. This is highly irregular, Howard muttered, making notes. Wills are generally considered final unless there's evidence of coercion or incompetence, or fraudulent omission. My father excluded a legal heir based on a belief he never verified. That's not a moral choice. That's a legal error. I pulled out a second envelope. This one contained a letter I'd written to my father but never sent. The one I'd kept for 3 years, waiting for the right moment. I'd brought it today, just in case. Just in case I needed more than scientific proof. I needed emotional truth. I also have this. A letter detailing every conversation where my father indicated he didn't believe Noah was mine. Every comment to family members. Every implied accusation. My mother can verify parts of it. So can my Aunt Helen, who heard him say it at Christmas 3 years ago. Thomas finally spoke. Hannah, what exactly are you asking for? I looked at my brother. We'd been close as kids. He used to let me tag along when he went fishing with his friends. He'd taught me to ride a bike. But when our father started excluding Noah, Thomas had stayed silent, had protected his own children's inheritance by not rocking the boat. I'm asking that Noah be recognized, that his name be added to the will as the 6th grandchild, that he received the same trust fund his cousins received. Not because I care about the money, but because for 5 years this family treated my child like he didn't exist, like he was disposable, and I want it on record, legally, officially, that he matters, that he's family, that our father was wrong. This could take months to resolve, Howard warned. The estate is frozen until we determine the legitimacy of your claim. I have time, I said. I've waited 5 years for my father to see the truth. I can wait a few more months for the legal system to acknowledge it. Victoria spoke up, her voice small. I'm sorry, Hannah. I should have said something. I should have defended Noah. Yes, I agreed. You should have. You all should have. My mother stood and walked to me, put her hands on my shoulders. You're right. About all of it. I was weak. I should have fought harder. Should have demanded he get tested if he had doubts. Should have protected you both instead of making excuses. She turned to Howard. I support Hannah's claim. Completely. Noah is my grandson, and he deserves to be treated like every other child in this family. That broke something open in the room. Thomas stood. I support it too. This has gone on long enough. Victoria nodded, wiping her eyes. Me too. Noah should have been included from the beginning. Howard made more notes. I'll need copies of these DNA results. Certified copies for the legal file. And I'll need to speak with the judge handling this state. This is unprecedented in my experience. But given the evidence and the family support, we may be able to reach an amendment. Whatever you need, I said. I documented everything. Every rejection. Every excluded holiday. Every birthday party where Noah watched his cousins receive gifts while he got nothing. I have photos. I have witnesses. I have a 5-year record of systematic exclusion based on a lie my father told himself. The meeting broke up shortly after. My siblings approached me one by one, offering apologies that felt both sincere and inadequate. They'd stood by and watched. They'd chosen their comfort over my son's dignity. Words couldn't fix that, but they were a start. My mother hugged me in the parking lot. When can I see him? When can I tell Noah that everything's going to change? When it's official, I said. When I have legal proof that he's been recognized. I'm not telling him anything until I know it's real. Until I can guarantee that no one will ever erase him again. She nodded, understanding. I'm proud of you. For fighting. For refusing to accept what your father did. I didn't fight for 5 years, Mom. I stayed silent. I played nice. I thought eventually love would win. It didn't. Documentation won. Legal proof won. The truth won. But it shouldn't have taken a DNA test and a reading to make my family see my son as human. She didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I. We stood there in uncomfortable silence. 2 women who'd loved the same cruel man and paid for it in different ways. 3 months later, Howard called me. The estate had been amended. A judge had reviewed the DNA evidence, the documented pattern of exclusion, and the family's testimony supporting Noah's inclusion. He'd ruled that my father's will contained a factual error regarding his legitimate heirs. Noah was added as the 6th grandchild. $500,000 in a trust fund he'd access at 25. His name officially recorded in the Whitmore family estate documents. Recognition. Legal. Permanent. Undeniable. I thanked Howard and hung up. sat in my apartment staring at the wall. 5 years. 5 years of fighting, documenting, swallowing rage and hurt and humiliation. And it had come down to a single test. A single piece of paper that proved what I'd known all along. That my son belonged. That he mattered. That he was family, whether my father wanted to admit it or not. I picked up Noah from school that afternoon. He was 6 now, in 1st grade, learning to read chapter books and make friends and navigate the world without the grandfather who'd rejected him. He climbed into the car with his backpack dragging behind him, told me about recess and math class and the science project his teacher assigned. Noah, I need to tell you something important. He looked up at me with those brown eyes, trusting, still innocent despite everything he'd been through. What, Mommy? Remember Grandpa? How he wasn't very nice to us. He nodded slowly. He didn't like me. That's not true, baby. He was confused. He made mistakes. But something happened. Something that proves you're part of our family. That you always were. I tried to explain it in terms a 6-year-old could understand. That Grandpa had been wrong about some things. That now everyone knew the truth. That Noah had cousins and an uncle and an aunt and a grandmother who all wanted to know him better. That there was money saved for when he was older to help him go to college or start his life. So Grandpa wasn't mean, he asked. He was just confused. I wanted to protect him, wanted to smooth over the cruelty and make it easier to swallow. But I also wanted him to know the truth, to understand that sometimes people fail you, even family. Grandpa made a choice not to know you. That was wrong. It hurt you and it hurt me. But now that choice can't hurt you anymore, because everyone knows you belong, and no one can ever say you don't. My mother organized a family dinner. First time in 6 years that I'd been invited to her house with Noah included in the invitation. She'd baked his favorite cookies, hung a banner that said, "Welcome home," set a place for him at the table where my father used to sit. My siblings brought their children. Noah met his cousins for the first time as actual family instead of as strangers who got presents while he got ignored. I watched him play with Maxwell and Sophia, with Oliver and Penelope and Charlotte. Watched him laugh and run and belong in a way he'd never been allowed before. Thomas pulled me aside. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm going to make sure my kids know their cousin. Really know him. Not just see him at obligatory family events." "That matters," I admitted. "It's not enough, but it matters." Victoria approached with red eyes. "I've been thinking about how many birthdays we missed. How many holidays where Noah should have been there. I can't get that time back, but I want to try. If you'll let me." I looked at her. He's 6 years old. He needs family who actually show up. If you can be that, then yes. Let's try. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was something more practical. An agreement to move forward. To choose Noah's future over his painful past. The money went into the trust fund. I didn't touch it. Didn't need to. It wasn't about the inheritance. It never had been. It was about the principle. About refusing to let my father's cruelty define my son's worth. About standing up and demanding that the truth matter more than rigid rules and false assumptions. I framed the DNA results, not to display them, but to keep them safe. Evidence that I'd fought for Noah when he couldn't fight for himself. Proof that sometimes love requires documentation. That truth requires evidence. That justice requires witnesses willing to speak up. Noah's file in my cabinet grew thicker over the years. The original DNA test. The amended will. Photos from that first family dinner where he was finally welcomed. Birthday cards from aunts and uncles and cousins who'd started remembering he existed. A paper trail of recognition, of belonging, of a family slowly learning to correct its own mistakes. I thought about my father sometimes, about whether he'd known he was wrong, whether he'd carried doubts to his grave, whether he'd regretted his choices in those final moments. I'd never know. He'd taken his pride and his certainty with him, left behind only the legal documents that revealed his failures. Noah thrived. That's the word his teachers used. Thrived. Made honor roll. Joined soccer and art club. Made friends easily because he'd learned early how to read people, how to recognize genuine kindness from polite distance. He asked about his grandfather sometimes. I told him the truth as much as a child could handle. That sometimes people make mistakes based on fear. That family is complicated. That love should be unconditional, but sometimes it comes with requirements people can't meet. Are you mad at Grandpa? He asked once. Yes, I said, but I'm also sad for him. He missed knowing an amazing kid because he was too stubborn to ask questions. That was his loss, not yours. I wish he could see me now, Noah said. I'm really good at soccer. Me too, baby. Me too. But my father had made his choice, had lived with it and died with it, and I'd made mine. To fight, to document, to demand recognition even when it would have been easier to walk away. To teach my son that his worth wasn't determined by people who refused to see him. Years passed. Noah turned 10, then 12, then 15. The trust fund sat waiting, growing with interest. My siblings' children became actual cousins. My mother became the grandmother she should have been from the beginning. The family healed around the wound my father had created, slowly learning what it meant to choose love over judgment. I never remarried. Never needed to. Jackson's memory was enough. The life I'd built with Noah was enough. We had each other, and eventually we had family who showed up, who remembered birthdays, who came to soccer games and school plays, who recognized that belonging isn't about how you enter a family, but whether that family chooses to see you. The DNA results stayed in their frame, a reminder of the battle I'd fought and won. Not for money, not for revenge, but for something simpler and more profound: recognition. The acknowledgement that my son existed, that he mattered, that he was family regardless of what anyone believed. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs someone brave enough to prove it, to stand up in a room full of people and demand that facts matter more than assumptions. That children deserve better than adult cruelty. That family should be about love, not legitimacy tests. On Noah's 18th birthday, I gave him the file. All of it. The DNA results, the will amendment, the documentation of 5 years of exclusion, the evidence of the fight I'd waged while he was too young to understand. He read through it quietly. His face changed as he processed what it meant, what his grandfather had done, what I'd done to fix it. You fought for me, he said finally, when I couldn't fight for myself. Always, I told him. That's what mothers do. He hugged me then. This young man who'd survived rejection and emerged kind anyway, who'd learned that worth comes from within, not from people who refuse to see it. Thank you, he whispered, for not giving up, for making them see. You were always worth seeing, Noah. Always. The trust fund was his at 25. 7 years from now. Enough to start a business or buy a house or do whatever he dreamed. But the real inheritance was something else entirely. The knowledge that when the world tried to erase him, his mother had proof, had fought back, had won. That truth, properly documented, was stronger than any lie. That family, at its best, was about choosing each other every single day, and that sometimes justice requires nothing more than standing up and demanding that people face facts they'd rather ignore. That was the legacy I gave my son. Not money, but the certainty that he mattered, that he'd always mattered, that no one, not even his own grandfather, could take that truth away.